Simon, thank you so much for being with us today and for doing our keynote. What a topic, right? The meaning of Greta. I can't wait to listen to you. Super to have you here. Those who don't know, Simon has been working with us on our coaching programs for a number of years now. He is a leading expert in the field of leadership, coaching, organizational theory. So his message, I'll have to read this out: organizations are ecosystems within ecosystem. It's a very pertinent message to be listening to right now, because in a world of today, we really ought to be thinking about systems rather than just people. So Simon is the founder and CEO of the Analytic-Network coaching network, which to date has trained over 300 coaches. He brings a deeply psychodynamic perspective to all his research and all his writing. And he founded in 2020, again, another name that I love, the Edgy Ideas podcast, to explore how to live a good life and create a good society. He's an adjunct professor at the University College Dublin and past president of the International Society for the Psychoanalytic Study of Organizations. So again, very, very many thanks to you, Simon, for being here. Please all join me in an upfront round of applause for Simon. We're so happy to have you.
A very warm welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alma. Alma, sorry. Could you go back to stage one? Yeah. Thanks, Alma. That's very kind, and very nice to be with you all. So today I'm talking about a paper which has just been published this week in Organizational and Social Dynamics, the home of group relations and psychoanalytic thinking for organizations. The title is The Meaning of Greta, and the reason I brought this, I got very interested in this subject was one, I mean, what a fascinating person Greta is. It's astonishing what she's achieved. And I've been very curious about trying to understand why Greta's become so famous, such a big presence in society. So I thought I'd do some research on it. The subject really interests me because, one, the environment is such a important, fundamental issue for us today. So for me, the environment is kind of part of everything we have to do in our organizations, in our coaching work, in our leadership work, in our psychological work. We have to start thinking about the organizational, how the organizations are ecosystems within these wider ecosystems. And when I talk about wider ecosystems, I talk about ecosystems of technology, of society, of people, and of nature, the environment. It's these three ecosystems together where we're getting huge disruptions, and it's the center of my work. So the other focus of the other thing which interested me in this subject was leadership. I write and I talk and I work in organizations around the idea of eco-leadership, around leadership working in ecosystems. And I think that Greta is fundamentally a very interesting example of an eco-leader, showing eco-leadership, an unusual way of understanding leadership as opposed to just thinking about the chief executive or the board or the person at the top of the organization. So that's what interested me. What I bring to this is I'm a clinician. I'm a family therapist. I'm a clinician, a psychotherapist. I work within organizations. I work within some of the biggest corporates, some of the banks, the public sector, education and health. I worked in not-for-profits as a consultant and as a coach, really trying to help organizations understand the new world in which they find themselves. And I'm an academic. So it's through these three lenses, the academic, the organizational and the clinical, coming together to try and understand the meaning of Greta. So if I could have the other slide, Orla. So this is not a psychological study of Greta's personality. What I'm trying to get to here is try to understand what Greta evokes in our social imaginary. What unconscious and conscious identifications do we project upon Greta, which have made her really a very unlikely famous person? From a lone schoolgirl to one of the most famous people in the world. It's astonishing, really. So these questions are not exploring her leadership traits or character traits. They're really focusing on Greta as a social object with a vast network. So what is a social object? Bruno Latour says a social object is a thing, an idea, a product, a brand, a technology, a person that forms an active node around which social networks form. So Greta is an active node around a social network which has become vast. Millions of people are part of her, follow her on Twitter. She's huge in the media. She's just an object where this social network around her has become immense. And this is what we're looking at today. So the way I'm going to discuss this is the part one, I'm going to try and explore the context in which Greta acts, in which she's part of. And then part two, I'm going to look at 5 meanings of Greta. And to do this, I'm drawing on 2 resources. I'm drawing on mainly on psychoanalysis and really thinking about what lies beneath the surface and bringing in a Lacanian perspective. And I do that because Lacan theorized a lot around jouissance, around desire, around libido. And it interests me about how people gain attachments and investments around the idea of enjoyment, what people enjoy, what their libidinal investments are. So rather than just looking at a traditional psychoanalytic view, which is really focusing on the wounded self, this is very much trying to understand what draws us to people, what fires our drive, our libido, what do we attach ourselves to and why, individually and socially. So we're going to be looking at that. So if I could have the next slide, please, Orla. Just to say as well, added to the psychoanalytic view, I also bring together a new social movement perspective. And new social movements are not really used much in organizational theory, and it's a huge loss. New social movement studies with theorists like Alberto Melucci, are fundamentally important for understanding how we focus a shift from old social movements to new social movements. So in new social movement studies, Melucci talks about how new social movements have explicit aims, so they'll aim for social justice or the environment or for gender rights, and they'll have a signifying presence. So the way they organize, the way they present themselves to the world has a message in itself. So they have a content message which they strive for, but the way they organize, the way that they set themselves up, also presents a signifying message to society. So if you think about the Occupy movement, it's a leaderless movement. It organizes it in a very ultra-democratic way, and it's trying to enact to society the goals it's aiming for. So it embodies the goals it's trying to present to society and demonstrate to society how to live. And I think trying to understand Greta, we can use the same methodology. Her explicit claims to for the environment and what she signifies to society. So we're looking at the conscious and the unconscious identifications that are projected onto Greta, which make her such an unlikely famous person. If we start to try and understand the frame Greta operates in, the context of Greta is that she started a school climate strike alone at the age of 16. So she was a lone person sat outside the Parliament building on climate strike. She had many personal problems. So she had Asperger's, she had eating disorders, she was getting depressed, and she decided to take personal action. This is the context we see her in. She went from that position at the age of 16 to becoming the Time Person of the Year in 2019. And Time wrote of her, Greta's become a social phenomenon, a global sensation. So she's become this social object with over 4.9 million Twitter followers. There's a movie about her. She's on mainstream media all the time. She's the unelected spokesperson for the environmental movement. She addresses heads of state at the UN, at Davos, in the EU Parliament. She's met world leaders, including the Pope. She sparred with President Trump. And she inspired 4 million people to join a global climate strike in September 2019, which was the largest climate demonstration in human history. So that's the context we're talking about. This is a phenomenal kind of presence. The context of the environment we know really, but just to summarize a few key points. There's an environmental emergency and a massive loss of biodiversity, which creates an existential threat to our life on the planet as we know it today. What interests me particularly in this context is how that threat really tears apart and disrupts long-held assumptions about nature, about human beings being at the center, about control of nature, about civilization and progress, and it disrupts ideas from the West of the Enlightenment, modernist ideas that science and reason would always produce progress, and this was be done in the pursuit of greater happiness. These ideas are fundamentally challenged when we see that we're actually destroying the very planet we live on. The ideas that there'll be cross-generational improvement are no longer guaranteed or even perceived for millions and millions of people. So the future is precarious at best and dystopic at worst. And in response to this threat, politicians and people are mobilized emotionally and psychologically. What's happening is that there's new libidinal economies emerging which underpin social dynamics. And I want to explore those libidinal economies next. A libidinal economy is really the emotional undercurrent, the unconscious attachments and investments. It's the affective power, drive, and the libido, which happens in social movements, in political parties, in organizations, in groups. And if we return to Freud in 1922 talks about a group is clearly held together by a power of some kind. And to what power could this feat be better ascribed than to Eros, that holds everything together in the world? That was Freud writing in 1922. So Freud's saying that this libido holds groups together, holds collectives together, and it's love at the heart of this. Beyond psychoanalysis, Gramsci at the same time in 1925 wrote that feelings and passion become the meaning and hence knowledge, and it's this that binds revolutionary movements together. So outside psychoanalysis, Gramsci was also saying that it's the emotions, the attachments that binds a revolutionary movement together. It's a passion. Effective investments fuel individual and collective libidinal drives that create the solidarity and commitment to act in political and social movements. Contemporary Lacanian psychoanalysis develops the theories of desires, jouissance, and the libidinal economy to shed light on social phenomena ranging from capitalism, consumerism, and populism. So this is the lens I'm using. And Sarah Ahmed talks about emotions and affects lead to collective politics and social alliances. So this is the lens we're looking at. This is the attention we're paying to. And there's three contexts in which Greta works, three political social contexts. The first is the environmental movement. The second will be the populist politicians and the climate deniers, her arch enemies, led by President Trump, of course. And the third libidinal economy I want to look at are the pragmatists, which is the political mainstream. And this is the domain in which Greta is operating. If we think about fear and anger, desire and hope as underpinning these movements, the environmental movements' fear is that life on planet is facing extinction, and the anger is directed at politicians and business elites who refuse to act with enough conviction to address these crises. Their desire and hope is that a new and a better world is possible. And they connect the environmentally sustainable world with a socially equitable world. So it's interesting that their desire and hope is not just for making the environment addressing the environmental emergency. It's also for creating a better world, a more socially equitable world. Their chant is system change, not climate change. The polar opposite to them are the populist politicians, which are growing across the West. We see it in India, we see it in South America. And these social political movements are the nemesis of Greta. They organize their little bit of an economy around a fear and anger that the people, who they claim are the pure people, have been left behind by existing elites and corrupt elites. And that the people have been displaced and taken over by undeserving others. Usually they focus on immigrants and others coming into the country. So they're all about building walls. So their anger and their fears are that they're being displaced and that they're being controlled by elites. Their desire and hope, their desire is to take back pleasure that has been stolen from them by the immigrant other and by the powerful elites. So they conceptualize that if it wasn't for these powerful elites, the big other or the undeserving other, the immigrants, then their pleasure would return to them, that this pleasure has been stolen from them. Their hope is to create a nostalgic golden age, return to a nostalgic golden age, a past imaginary age where there is purity, where there is economic stability, where there is social bonding, unity, and cultural homogeneity. So that's kind of underpinning the populists. The mainstream pragmatists, they're really Greta's main target as she speaks, because they're her best chance of change. And their fear is a fear of radicalism, and particularly of populist radicalism, of which they're angry with. They identify as moderate rationalists. Greta and her followers claim that these people are in denial of the severity of the crisis and they're turning a blind eye. The pragmatist desire is of stability and that they can retain their own power influence. And their hope is that rationality and moderation will deliver a safe and tolerant world, also protecting their power base. So this is the three players in Greta's world: the environmentalists, the populist oppositions, the climate deniers, and then the pragmatist political mainstream, who she believes are in some kind of denial and not acting with enough conviction. So I'm now going to talk about the 5 meanings of Greta. Greta gains maximum attention not via the words and the content of what she says. I mean, what Greta says is nothing new, really. Many others are saying this in many different ways. Her extraordinary success and power come from how she, as a messenger, presents and delivers and embodies the message. So looking at new social movement theory, it's not just a message. The message is powerful, but how she delivers it, how she embodies it, what this signifies to the rest of society. And that's what I'll be looking at today. Globally transmitted images of Greta, the child leader, admonishing the most powerful leaders in the world, are hugely important if we're trying to understand Greta Thunberg. So what are the 5 meanings of Greta? The first meaning is vulnerability. The second is not patriarchy. The third, giving voice to the voiceless. The fourth is prophetic messenger. And the 5th is turning the world upside down. And I'll address these one by one. So the first message, vulnerability. Greta presents as vulnerable. Alter and Haynes wrote that Thunberg is 16, but she looks 12. She usually wears her light brown hair pulled into 2 braids parted in the middle. This small schoolgirl whose growth was stunted by a previous eating disorder, who openly acknowledges her Asperger's diagnosis, past depression and OCD, presents as vulnerable and fragile. She often looks a little bewildered in the public sphere. Yet from this place of vulnerability, she speaks with a fearless voice. So what's the meaning of this presentation of vulnerability? This embodiment of vulnerability is something that others identify with. Greta's vulnerability signifies 3 things. Firstly, the vulnerability and fragility of planet Earth itself. So her own vulnerability conveys a message that this Earth we're on, this environmental crisis, is a very vulnerable place. Her vulnerability also signifies the experience of vulnerability that millions of others feel. Millions feel vulnerable when fearing climate change and experiencing climate change. The impacts are already happening with us, as we can see by heat waves and fires and pollution across the globe. So this feeling of vulnerability for our present and our future is mirrored in people's experience. And when Greta stands up in front of a huge audience and reveals her vulnerability, they can identify with it. And the third powerful thing about her vulnerability is that Greta's vulnerability does not imply impotence. So she signifies to the world that although we are in a vulnerable place, we do not have to be paralyzed by it. She conveys a vulnerable and a courageous presence, which resonates strongly with those who feel vulnerable and impotent. It gives meaning and hope to an experience. To be vulnerable does not mean being powerless. So that's the first meaning, vulnerability. The second meaning is not patriarchy. And the message she presents is the reverse image of the macho and toxic patriarchy presented by populist male leaders who champion climate change denial. Feminism and environmentalism have long been coupled together. Some feminists try to co-opt Greta, seeing her through the feminist gaze, but Greta refuses that position. She sticks with her environmental agenda. She doesn't fit into a normative feminist narrative, perhaps because of her young presentation and age, perhaps because of her focus is solely on the environment. However, her message is very clear. Patriarchy will not deliver change. So what's the meaning of Greta presenting a non-patriarchal embodied self? She plays back to wider society a vision that the patriarchal world is not the only possible world, that patriarchal leaders are not the only leaders. She embodies the idea that another world is possible, that power and leadership reside in different forms. Her personal and physical presence transcend male-female binary. The movement she speaks for demands not patriarchy, because patriarchy got us into this mess. The climate protesters chant system change, not climate change, and system change connects environmental change to social, economic, and political and identity changes. Not patriarchy demands power structure change. And these are only possible when new identifications and changing liberal economies emerge to support these new power structures. So Greta's present reveals to us how nonconformist, non-binary, and non-patriarchal ways of being in the world can open up a new space for the transformation of society. The third meaning is giving voice to the voiceless. History can become punctuated by a single voice, such as Bob Dylan in the 60s, and Greta has become this generational voice for our time. One of her followers, Varshini Prakash, writes, she symbolizes the agony, the frustration, the desperation, the anger, at some level the hope of so many young people who won't even be of age to vote by the time their futures are doomed. The meaning of giving voice to the voiceless. Greta presents herself as somebody who is voiceless, a single person, a child, outside a parliament building, a disempowered young girl suffering mental health problems who took solitary action. She's a symbol of the voiceless finding a very powerful voice, and this gives everyone a huge hope. Some of the voiceless people she speaks for are school-aged children, whose generation will inherit the climate crisis. The marginalized environmental activists, she speaks for them. For the environment itself, which has no voice, for the fauna and the flora being decimated by diversity damage, the Amazon rainforest, the polar regions are multi-species companions. And the indigenous people, the sub-Saharans, Africans, and other impoverished people who are most at risk of the impact of climate crisis and have no voice. So she's captured the zeitgeist, and she's bringing the voice of the voiceless to the powerful. The fourth message of Greta is that she's a prophetic messenger. Fintan O'Toole, the Guardian and Irish Times writer, wrote about her following her address to the UN, and he said, Greta Thunberg is a prophet, a preacher, a rule breaker, an avenging angel. From the small girl on stage comes a quavering voice, like a cry of an Old Testament prophet. She transmits the anger of others that speak through her. Margaret Atwood said of Greta, she's wonderful. She's sort of the Joan of Arc of the environment. I think she needs a big white horse. Greta speaks like a prophet. Oceans will rise, cities will flood, millions of people will suffer. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear. I feel the fear I feel every day, and I want you to act, she told people at Davos. The meanings of this prophetic message. Greta's lived personal experience is prophetic. If Greta, a schoolgirl, can rise to lead a global movement, then people can rise to demand system change, and politicians can rise to deliver change. Her prophetic voice announces a breakthrough in normative consensus, shattering complacency and denial. And her prophecy announces a new future, revealing the collective desire for salvation. Many of her adoring followers desire salvation, desire for a transcendent force, a charismatic superhero, a new prophet to lead them to the promised land. Greta reverses the commonly idealized position of the Messiah leader. We don't expect to see a Messiah leader in the body of a schoolgirl. Yet in achieving the status, she propels herself to even higher in the salvation stratosphere. The final message I want to share before I end is the meaning of Greta is the turning of the world upside down. A child leader telling adults to grow up is a reversal of the dominant code. And again, this returns to new social movement theory and Malucci's work and Della Porter's work. And they talk about new social movements reverse dominant codes, and they offer paradoxes. Paradoxes that reverse codes by exaggeration. And there's nothing more exaggerated than a tiny figure, a young girl standing in front of the UN, berating them. She says to them, world leaders are behaving like children, so it falls to us to be the adults in the room. She presents them with the paradox. She presents a world that is turned upside down. She signifies the irrational world where thousands of school children have to strike to activate adults. She also reveals a world that needs to be turned upside down. So she presents a world that is turned upside down. This is crazy. This is irrational. This is back to front. And then she points to the hope that this world needs to be turned upside down. We need to undergo system change, which can deliver address the environmental emergency and other social problems. Global leaders that hold the world attention are not 16-year-old children, shy children with neurodevelopmental disorders and a recent past of depression. School children rarely convoke world leaders on the international stage. Greta is a wounded healer who millions identify with, turning her Asperger's diagnosis into a superpower. So this turning upside down the world and pointing to the changes that need to happen is another meaning of Greta. I'm just going to finish by reading a conclusion. Greta's 5 messages this presentation identifies vulnerability, not patriarchy, giving voice to the voiceless, being a prophetic messenger, and turning the world upside down, come together to form a collective meaning that Greta brings to the world. She is a sign that heightens society's awareness of what we repress and what we deny. In this sense, she operates in a similar way to a shaman from the past, a psychoanalyst with a patient, or how a new social movement acts in relation to society. All 3 aim to reveal what is concealed and to make visible that which is hidden. This is to enable what is manifested and brought into consciousness and awareness that can then be worked with. The meaning we can extrapolate from how Greta presents as a messenger is as follows. We are all vulnerable and the planet is vulnerable. Patriarchy has failed and the voices need to be heard. And we need her and others to act as prophetic messengers to make us more aware of our predicament. That is that the human species is acting irrationally in the face of the greatest existential threat ever. The meaning of Greta is that the world is turned upside down. We claim to be rational beings, yet we act as a species as in a self-destructive and irrational way. The meaning of Greta is that the world needs turning upside down in order to deliver system change. She embodies the urgent need for new identifications that deliver new meanings, the need for new forms of organization and leadership, new power structures, new liberal economies to emerge that would drive change to address the environmental emergency. Greta provides no answers, but she does provide meaning, and we should all pay attention. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Simon, for such a thought-provoking talk. So, everybody, the floor is now open for questions, comments, and just to remind you, you can either pop your comments and write them out in the comments pane, or you can use the raise your hand function, and I will do my very best to call people up in order. Amazing, absolutely, Diana. Yes, I would underscore that. So, Mark, would you like to come in first, please?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Alma. Simon, it's Mark Stringer. How are you? It's been a while. Hope things are all right.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Thank you for that. I've just got a couple of thoughts as you were speaking. One was interested about the idea of Greta, as you stated, being a social object. And I just wondered, so my first question is, do you see Greta as representing, the objet petit in terms of that kind of the desire from, from us as onlookers, as trying to fill that kind of that lack, and in some ways that it's a defense against the trauma of what would be the Lacanian real that we're trying to protect against in terms of the this yawning gap in the environment. And the third part was really the idea I really loved about the idea of seeing her as the analyst. But I suppose the risk of that is that we project onto her the idea of the subject supposed to know, as in that Greta has all the answers. When and I think that I don't know if you see that as being a risk as well, in terms of how she's viewed.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's kind of yes and would be my answers to those questions. Yes, she is an object petit in the sense of being a prophetic messenger. People project onto her kind of this great hope, this messianic hope. And, I was quite worried about her. I mean, I think she seems to have matured and survived, and I'm hoping that she's going to be well. But I was very worried about her early on. The amount of projection she was taking were enormous, and the pressure and the hope. So I think she does that. But she also presents us with the real. This is what I'm very interested in. She's very interesting. So her vulnerability presents us with the real at the same time. So it's not just a kind of cover up of lack. She also kind of exposes the lack. So it's both happening at the same time, I think. And as regarding kind of the one who's supposed to know, there are dangers. I wrote my paper from doing action research kind of with Extinction Rebellion and stuff, participating with them. And there is a huge amount of kind of messianic kind of hope placed on our shoulders. So that is a danger, absolutely. So thanks for your question.
Marvellous. Thanks, Simon.
So Simon, I thought I would reflect back a comment from Gillian to you. Yes, I agree. I worry for Greta on a number of levels. I think she is a messiah, and I think she's being used by the morph need of the zeitgeist. I think she may be chewed up and set aside.
Yeah, I mean that was a worry, but it's interesting following her. I mean, her parents and her family say, and she says that she was in a very, very desperate place, and actually taking this action has actually made her a healthier, happier person. And at the moment, she looks a happier and healthy person. When you're interviewing her, she does seem to be doing well. So I think the danger is there, absolutely. I was very, very worried, but maybe being an object of change and growing up as maybe it's been a transitional kind of period for her where she's actually discovered herself and maybe she might come out of this well, I hope.
This is interesting. I mean, may I just add my own reflection, because I heard you both say that she suffers from mental health issues, but also about her mobilizing her autism superpowers.
Yeah.
And, there is something in there on the one hand about a lack of agency and suffering. And then on the other hand, of course, to mobilize what you've got within you, you need human agency, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so if we just look at it through a wounded self lens, we could see it as a very damaged kind of picture. But there is something else about her which has agency and has life, and so let's hope that kind of works for her.
Thank you. Hugh, would you like to come in now, Hugh Goldsmith?
Yeah. Hi there, Simon. Fantastic talk. Really enjoyed it. I was thinking about what's the perspective about the meanings of Greta from those whose power she's challenging, because in a sense, by inviting her to the UN, etc., they've given her power, they've given her a stage. So how do you see that sort of the reflection of Greta from those whose power she's challenging?
I think they were shocked with how she performed. I think they were going to present this young schoolgirl, and she was going to make a nice speech, and they could all clap. And she actually shocked them with her violent beration of them. Really, I mean, on my presentation, I had a video of her, and every time I watch it, it shocks me. Just the power of it is incredible. So I'm not sure that they got what they expected. But yeah, I mean, the middle ground politicians, the pragmatists, they do want to address the environment. They do want Greta to kind of inspire change at one level, and at another level, they want to hold on to their power and hold on to the existing normals. So I think I think there's a lot of ambivalence, to be honest. I think it plays out ambivalently, yeah. But I think we gave them more than they expected.
I agree.
Thank you, Hugh. So just picking up on a couple more comments from the comments box. So Steve commented that the predominant message seems to be that of a prophetic messenger. And how would that compare? Has that ever existed before? Cordelia said she's an interesting contrast, for instance, to Malala.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't studied Malala much, but there's a contrast and there's similarities, of course. There's young women showing huge leadership and driving social change. So there's it's interesting. Again, it's part of this world being turned upside down. It's almost the world is being shaken.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe needs young women to do that.
Maybe.
Maybe it does, yes. Oh, interesting thought from Janet, because you were saying how deeply you were affected by watching this video of her. So what Janet is commenting here is, so why are we worrying about her so much? What does this actually say about us, about humankind? Because there seems to be this worry about Greta, this concern.
Well, she is a concern. I mean, she was a huge concern to her own father and own parents. I mean, they changed their lives to try and address it. And if you know, I've worked as a family therapist. I've worked with anorexics and depressed young women and self-harmers. You know, and it's incredibly worrying. You know, it's incredibly worrying to see someone vulnerable. You know, going through a kind of adolescent transition with mental health issues. It is incredibly worrying, and I think to see someone like that thrust onto the world stage, it's shocking, really, and it makes you gasp to see this. You know, I'm still very moved by her presence, and yet I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that, you know, she's uses as transition, but you know, it's a precarious. She presents back to us a precarious nature of the world and life. There's a precariousness about her, less so now, I think.
Thank you. Yes, and profound comment from Gillian here. You know, maybe we are projecting some of our own fears and our own vulnerability onto her in a world that is a threat, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was the meaning of the vulnerability. She presents it back to us. It's like she reflects back our own vulnerability, and we identify with that very strongly, I think.
So how come then, Simon, this is a question from Shafag, that her vulnerability and her sincerity is then met with such aggression from certain quarters? How can we explain this?
Well, the certain quarters we're talking about are Bolsonaro, President Trump, populists who have reversed their own kind of codes of that they enjoy transgression a lot. So they enjoy attacking women, they enjoy attacking immigrants, they enjoy attacking the vulnerable. They enjoy LGBT people. They pick on marginal groups. That's kind of part of how they gain their own resource, how they gain their own pleasure. So she's like a red flag to a bull, and they enjoy attacking her and they get pleasure from that. But I think for the majority of people on the pragmatist and the environmental side, she exposes us to our own vulnerability. The populists, the patriarchal kind of populists, the macho kind of populist kind of message people she upsets, particularly men. I mean, in the paper I've written up, I'll give you all a link to the paper later after this. But I talk about how she kind of particularly upsets middle-aged men.
Yes. Funny that.
Funny that, you know, and it's, we think about vulnerable egos and stuff, and some people kind of identify with it and get moved by it, and other people kind of their defenses come up and they attack back, and I think that's what we're seeing, really.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you. Great, Simon. Thank you so much. I hope you have realized from the number of comments and from the vivaciousness of the chat as well, just how much your presentation has resonated with everybody. There was also a very pragmatic question about, would you be happy to share your slides?
Yes, yeah, I share my slides, and I'll give you a link to the paper. I'm going to be putting it on social media kind of next day or two, so I'll send it to you, Almouth, and you can share it with everybody. So thanks very much for everybody for listening, for being patient.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon.